So let's say you're building your Rails app and it's going great, and your new angel investor really wants you to put an image of a cat on the homepage of the web app you're building. Well, okay, you think that's kind of weird, but the checks are caching, so you'll do what they say, and it's just a static image, so I'll just put this in public, and we can see right here that this is actually in public. I have an image of a kitten right here in my file list, and so we just have an image tag that we add to our application layout. We go and refresh our page, and boom, we have a picture of a kitten. Now we have also a happy angel investor. But later that night, you read up on Rails documentation and you realize that you should have actually put this in app assets images and use the image tag. So you decide to do a little bit of an experiment. We put this into app assets images. As we can see, there's a kitten picture in images, and then we add a new image tag for kitten.jpg. So we go back to our home page, we hit refresh, and okay, great, we see the two pictures of kittens. And now it looks meowsing, but when you refresh your page, you notice in the network tab that there's two different files here, kitten.jpg and kitten-e4ebcc51.jpg. What the heck is the difference between these two files? Well, to answer that question, we need to talk about static assets, prop shaft, and sprockets. Strap in, nerds, this is a fun little ride. So before we talk about anything, let's talk about static files in Rails. You see, Ruby on Rails has an MVC structure, which means that every resource, for the most part, has a corresponding model, view, and controller. But what happens when a browser makes a request for something that's not part of the MVC framework for Rails? For example, an image. Do you just create a new route for this image and serve it from a show page or something? Hell no. Rails considers non-dynamic files, which are things that don't have Ruby code, static. And static files are typically stored in the public directory and are handled through the Action Dispatch static middleware. The Action Dispatch static middleware will intercept these calls in a smart way so they don't even bother your Rails app. And this is what happens in the above example. Static middleware sees the request for a static image, grabs the file for you, and that's what's happening with both files here. But what is the deal with that weird file name? Well, it all has to do with one word. That word is cache. You see, typically servers and users' browsers all love to cache your static files. Usually this works just fine because a lot of your static assets shouldn't really change a ton. Think about things like maybe your logo or some stock photos or maybe an image of a cat on your homepage. Those are examples of static assets where they probably won't change much, if at all, so it's okay if a user's browser caches that asset. But there are some static files that may change a lot, like your JavaScript or CSS files. Here, let's explain with a little bit of a diagram. So let's just say you have a JavaScript file here, right? This is some amazing JavaScript code, but this is a file with JavaScript code and it's a static file according to Rails. So now let's say a user's browser will actually request this file from you. This is the browser. When the user browser requests this from your Rails server, it'll serve it up to this browser, and then the browser will cache this response somewhere in its storage. So now let's say you're working on your application and you've changed a lot of the code for some of the JavaScript. So now this file's contents have changed. So you have a new file here that you want to serve to the browser. Now, when a user's browser requests this file from your assets, it will notice that it's the same name as the thing it cached earlier. So instead of actually grabbing the file from your server, thus grabbing the new one, it will go back to its cache instead. And this file will just never be seen until the user's browser's cache has cleared up. I'm not sure how long that is. It probably depends on the browser, the user, etc. But suffice to say, you're going to have a lot of misses on this new JavaScript code that you just wrote because it's just the same name. So how would you handle this problem here where a browser will use the cache of your file instead of the new file itself when you make some changes? Well, the most straightforward way to do this is to stamp the files with a value that represents the contents of that file so that the file name will change when you change the contents of the file. Here, let's check this out. In our app, we can go to app JavaScripts controllers, and we see in here that we have a bunch of JavaScript files, okay? So for example, let's start with hello controller.js. We could actually take the contents of this file and put it into a hash by using something like OpenSSL's SHA-256 algorithm. We can type hello controller and we get back a SHA that represents the contents of this file. So we can then actually rename our hello controller file to hello_controller dash and put the contents of that SHA in there. And there we go. So now we have a new name for our hello controller. Now, if we actually change anything within the file for hello controller, let's go over here and look at it. We can add, let's say, another console.log. I've been playing with this file a little bit here, but this is a new console. Let's just say that for the changes. Now, if we go down and we grab our hello controller.js file again, if we type OpenSSL SHA-256 on hello_controller.js, you can see here we actually get a new value for our SHA that is different than the previous value. That is because the contents of this file have changed. So when this file has changed, what we do is we can now stamp our new hello controller.js file with this new SHA that we just got. And so with this situation, what we can do is we can not worry about the user's browser holding onto some cache, because right now we have this file stamped with a SHA. So when the browser requests files, what it'll do is it'll see a whole new file here. And so it'll actually grab this file, even though it's very similar to the one that you had up here. And guess what? PropShaft, the asset manager in Rails 8 by default, does exactly this. But before we talk about PropShaft, we need to talk about how PropShaft came to be. Let's take a little trip back in time. So the year's 2011, and 3 of the best movies ever made just came out. That's right, I'm talking about Inception, The Social Network, and Kung Fu Panda 2. And in 2011, 4 years before ES6 was released, Sprockets became the main asset manager in Rails, which was version 3.1, by the way. Now, Sprockets was a great asset manager for Rails, and it did a lot of things. It, number one, handled our cache problem that we just talked about by stamping our asset files with a hash based on the contents of those files, but it also did much, much more. In short, it did a few pretty major things. As we mentioned before, Sprockets would digest and stamp files with their hashes and their names to break the cache. And if you remember back in the day, CoffeeScript was a big deal. Sprockets would convert CoffeeScript to JavaScript, and it would also convert Sass to CSS so older browsers could render them. Also, the browsers were lagging behind pretty badly when it came to ES6 support once ES6 was available in 2015. Sprockets used Babel to convert ES6 into something browsers could understand, like ES3. Sprockets also processed, combined, and minified all assets into as few files as possible to save on the requests to the server. You see, back in the day, the web was still on HTTP 1. And in HTTP 1, you could only really load one resource after another. And once that resource finished loading, you could then load another resource. Now you can imagine there was a big premium on the number of connections you would make to HTTP 1, because if you had a lot of files that HTTP 1 was trying to access, it would cause this long cascading list of file requests that were only being completed serially, not in parallel. Therefore, you had to try as hard as possible to reduce the number of requests your browser would make to get your assets. And that's what Sprockets did. It combined a bunch of stuff into one file as often as it could so that you had as little connections to HTTP 1 as you could. But then things got even more complicated. You see, in 2015, when ES6 was released, it included an amazing assortment of new language features that JavaScript desperately needed. And the dev world just exploded with JavaScript-based tooling and web applications. This was the rise of the single-page web app. Now, Sprockets tried to keep up with all this asset processing and transpiling, but it grew really large and hard to maintain as a result. All these different transpiling techniques, tools, libraries became really difficult to keep up with, and Sprockets just didn't always handle all the advanced JavaScript features. It also required additional configuration to work well with tools that were gaining in popularity, like Webpack, for example. But lately, things have been changing. You see, now the year is 2024, and there have been some great improvements that allow us to simplify a lot of things with asset management. A handful of things have happened recently. Number one, ES6 became supported on all major browsers, so we don't have to transpile our ES6 code for a browser to run it. It's now supportive natively. And also, we're not really writing CoffeeScript anymore, so there's no need for transpiling there either. Number two, there have been advancements in CSS. That means we no longer need to write Sass because we now have variables and nesting support in regular CSS. Also, HTTP2 is now the standard, and it has multiplexing. And multiplexing allows browsers to fire off multiple requests at once on the same TCP connection and receive those requests back in any order. This allows us to make many requests at the same time for our assets, so we don't have to compress, minify, and mush all our code together anymore. And in general, the internet has become more stable and faster overall, and we don't have to worry about minifying our assets just quite the way we used to. Not to mention, if you have a complicated JavaScript setup, you're most likely using your own Node.js runtime or building system on your own anyways. So all of this complexity that was built up over the years has finally led to a massive simplification. We can now serve our assets much more simply, and PropShaft does exactly that. It doesn't transpile anything or minify or concatenate files. It merely digests and stamps files to provide a nice cache-breaking solution, and it provides nice mapping from those stamped assets to their actual files in dev. Here, check this out. So as you remember from the example we talked about before, we used an image tag for our kitten.jpg asset, and we got back a hashed value kitten-e4ebcc51.jpg. So then what is happening here? Well, PropShaft enables the image tag to use the logical name of the file thanks to a manifest file. This manifest file with compiled assets will point this hashed file name to the actual name of our file in the codebase. Now in development, this is all done under the hood, but in production, we could pre-compile our assets on deploy. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So now let's run bin rails assets precompile. Now this uses PropShaft to precompile all of our assets, but what did it just do? This stamps all of our files that are considered static assets with hashes based on the contents of those files in their names, and it puts all these files into the public folder so that browsers can access them through public. And we can even CD into this assets controller, and if we check out all of our assets here, we can go into our controllers and we can open up our hello controller that is now stamped with a new version based on the contents of the file, and we can see that it is the original file we were just working with. So PropShaft took this file, just stamped it with a new value in its name based on the contents of the file like we did in our example, and here we go. This is it right here. Awesome. And if we now go to our network tab, we can see that we have the corresponding hello controller with that file name right here. We can see it is the same exact file from before. And since there's no transpiling and minification, it's just the regular JavaScript right here. So fantastic. And once again, since we're here, we can see how HTTP2 works. We made all of these requests all at once for all of our assets, and they all got returned right around the same exact time. Pretty cool. Okay, so now we have our files that are stamped with these hash values, and it breaks all the cache in a good way, and we have all the good stuff that we want out of PropShaft. That's awesome. But back to our example before, when we actually added this image tag with the name kitten on it, how does PropShaft know that kitten actually corresponds to this new kitten with a hashtag right here? Well, that's because PropShaft creates a manifest file so it can reference all of these canonical file names under the hood. Here, check this out. If we open up public assets.manifest.json, we see here we have a big JSON file with keys and values, and the keys are the original file names and the values are the newly stamped hashed file names. So that's why we can do things like with image tag refer to our original file name and actually have it pointing to the newly hashed stamped file name that we have right here, which is pretty amazing. You can also do the same thing in CSS by referencing these file names without having the hashes in them, because under the hood, PropShaft compiles the CSS files to replace those names in line. So there is some light CSS compilation that happens to resolve these digested file names for CSS. So PropShaft is a dead simple asset management tool for Rails 8 that was brought about thanks to the advancements in networking, HTTP, and browsers. Thanks to all these new technologies, we can make things easier than ever when it comes to asset management and improving the developer experience in Rails. Rails 8 is truly a one-person framework, and PropShaft just makes one more thing easier for devs, which is asset management. And hey, thanks nerds.